Hi, I'm Pastor Theron. Welcome to church where you are and your Wednesday Bible study. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to say a word of welcome and thanks to the good people of Bellevue Baptist Church in Westlake, Louisiana, who are currently using these videos to help with their congregation, who is not meeting due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. If that's something that might benefit your church or your group, reach out to me. You can contact me on Facebook Messenger, or you can call me directly or text me if you have my number. If you like what I'm doing here on YouTube, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Leave me a thumbs up, a like, share with other people. Leave a comment down below. I'd like to hear from you, and tell me maybe what you'd like to have covered in future videos. Our passage today is a continuation of our study for Wednesdays in the miracles that Jesus performed in his earthly ministry. And this one is about the man with the shriveled hand, found in Matthew chapter 12, Mark chapter 3, and Luke chapter 6. I'll be reading from the New International Version. I hope that you will follow along with me in whatever version that you prefer, in a book or on a phone or however you like. I like to read all of the different gospel versions of the story. In this case, there are 3, so that we get a better, more well-rounded picture of what was taking place, as each person will tell a slightly different variation of the story. So from Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 9, the story goes like this. Going on from that place, where they had been was that Jesus and the disciples had been out walking, and the disciples had picked some grain and had wound it around in their hands to eat the kernels, and the Pharisees were angry because they were grinding wheat on the Sabbath day or whatever. We'll get into that in a minute. But going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." And then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. From Mark chapter 3, same story, beginning in verse 1. Another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, some of them being the Pharisees, looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger, and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. And from Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, Luke writes it this way. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. What an interesting story. That here is Jesus walking into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And here are the Pharisees, who in those days were the law makers. They were the ones who wrote the law. They interpreted the Old Testament law, and they wrote the laws for modern day. They wrote the laws in those days to apply to the people, and as time changes, the instructions change a little bit. And so they would take their interpretation of the Old Testament law and bring it into the modern day as much as they were able. The problem was that as time went on, and as their notoriety grew, and as their wealth grew, as their popularity grew, as their fame grew, they became more and more corrupt. And with their corruption came the corruption of the law. Jesus comes into the scene and begins telling people that he is the Son of God. He's come to fulfill the law. He's come to set the captives free. And it just flies in the face of what the Pharisees are trying to do. They're trying to maintain their own religious order in their old Judaism, and they're not liking this new guy and his movement and all the freedom that comes with following Jesus. And so even from the very beginning, there was a rift, there was a struggle between Jesus and the Pharisees, and the laws that they were interpreting, and the problems that they had, and the clashing one with another. And here's just another example of Jesus' interaction with the Pharisees. Now, depending on how you interpret this, it makes for pretty interesting consideration. And so as we go through this video, if you're in a group and you'd like to pause the video and discuss amongst yourselves the potential answers to some of the questions that I will pose, I would encourage you to do that, and then start the video back up again, and maybe I have come up with some of the same ideas and we'll explore it from there. Okay, so we're going to stay in the Gospel of Luke for the majority of this discussion and study. And so I hope that you will stay there, but I'll be referring back to Matthew and Mark and some other passages as well. You might jot them down. We'll look at those later on. It goes like this. Verse 6, chapter 6, verse 6 of Luke says, on another Sabbath, that's after the Sabbath, where Jesus and his disciples were walking by the grain field, and the disciples picked some of the heads of the grain and they ground it in their hands and they ate the kernels. That would have broken Old Testament law, you see, because the law said there was no gleaning to be done, no gleaning, no reaping, no harvesting. Is a long list of laws. In fact, modern Jews practice laws. I found a list of 39 laws for the modern interpretation of Judaism, and we'll get to that in a minute. But on this particular Sabbath, he went into the synagogue. Now, Luke and Mark says the synagogue. In Matthew, it says their synagogue, meaning the Pharisees. So already we're seeing a division in the way of thinking of this. Jesus has been in the synagogue before. He's been handed scripture and read it and interpreted it. He has already contradicted a lot of what they were trying to do and to say. But on this particular Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and he was teaching. And there was a man there whose right hand was shriveled. Now, I think that it's important to note a couple of things. First of all, that this man just happened to be there. I don't think it was by accident. I think that in the Old Testament law, a man with a shriveled hand was not allowed to be in the synagogue. I'm not completely sure on that. I know he wasn't allowed to be in the temple because he was not whole. And I know that lepers certainly were not allowed to be in that sort of a setting. So it's questionable whether this person was supposed to be there. So it begs the question, who brought him? Did he come in by himself, or did the Pharisees bring him in as a trap? That's my own personal belief, is that the Pharisees brought him in to trap Jesus. They'd done it before. In another passage, it talks about a woman that they caught in the act of adultery, and they brought her to Jesus, and they said, is it lawful? What are we supposed to do here? The Old Testament law says we're supposed to stone her. You remember what Jesus said? The one of you without sin cast the first stone. And nobody could do it. They all just dropped their rocks and walked away. But it was set up to be a trap, to ensnare Jesus. I just have to think in this particular case, same circumstances. So there's a man there, just happens to be there, that Jesus is going to bump into. Now, you are familiar with the compassion of Jesus. Jesus came to set the captives free. He came to make the lame to walk and the blind to see. Certainly a man with a shriveled hand, a shriveled right hand, which is the hand of strength. It is the hand that most people work with. So it's also noteworthy to say that the man's right hand was shriveled. Whether it was from some accident, whether he was born that way, we don't know. But his right hand was shriveled, which made it impossible for this man to do the work that he used to do. So unless he had some sort of formal education, it would have been very, very difficult for this man to have made a living, to provide for his family, to provide for himself. There's all of these different circumstances. And so as Jesus enters the synagogue, just so happens to be that a man there with a shriveled hand. Verse 7, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. It just furthers my point that I think that he was put there as a plant, as a trap to ensnare Jesus. They were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Another point I would like to make is that word would. They were waiting to see if Jesus would heal. It sort of implies that they knew he could heal. Now they're asking if he would heal. They were watching him closely, looking for a reason to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. They were looking for a reason to accuse him for breaking their laws. They were looking to see if he would heal, not if he could heal. I think that's very noteworthy. You see, it's a matter of how they were to define work. Because in Jewish tradition, it is said that a person could come to the aid of someone who is sick or injured on the Sabbath for a life-threatening injury or life-threatening problem, but this was not life-threatening. The man has had this for a while. The problem is that it threatened his livelihood and could potentially threaten the life of his family, not being able to provide for them. So I look at it as this is just exactly the right person, because his affliction borders on life-threatening, though it wasn't life-threatening to himself. This man's livelihood, the livelihood of his family, his welfare here are at stake. And so it becomes a question of, would Jesus heal? Not could he, and for what reason? And this healing to relieve the affliction of the man who is injured or has this affliction of the shriveled hand. Can that be done on the Sabbath? It depends on your interpretation of the law. It depends on their interpretation of the laws that they wrote. Verse 8. But Jesus knew what they were thinking. A word hasn't been spoken here. Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and come and stand in front of everyone." And so he got up and he stood there. He knew their thoughts. No words have been spoken. Jesus recognizes it as a trap, I believe, and he brings the man up front. Now, they're in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and it becomes a question of, would he heal? Would he break their laws? What is Jesus going to do? And so they're watching closely. It really becomes a question of, what's the purpose of the Sabbath? What's the purpose of the Sabbath? You know, if you go all the way back to the Old Testament, into the first book of Genesis, and God created everything in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested, and he called it holy. And so he established, even from the very beginning, the idea of a Sabbath rest, the seventh day, the Sabbath, which for Old Testament Jews is Saturday. Even in Spanish, Saturday is Sábado, Sabbath day, and Sunday is Domingo, the Lord's day. So we as New Testament believers practice Sabbath rest on Sunday, the resurrection day, but the Sabbath day is Saturday. So it becomes a question of, what's the purpose of the Sabbath day? God sets it aside and calls it holy. It's intended to be, as God did, it's intended to be a day of rest. It's intended to be a day to attend church. It's intended to be a day of worship and reflection on God, who also rested. It's intended to be a day where you rest and you enjoy and you fellowship with friends and family and you worship your Creator. In Jesus' day, it was no different. The Sabbath day was intended to be a day of rest. Yet the Pharisees wrote all of these laws, so many in fact, that it was hard to keep up with. In a modern interpretation of the Pharisaical law, this particular website shows 39 different categories of Sabbath work prohibited by law. And they are extensive. Such things as carrying. You're not supposed to carry anything. And you remember that Jesus was in trouble for telling the man to get up and carry his mat. That breaks the Sabbath. You're not supposed to burn anything. You're not supposed to involves making fire or causing something to burn. It says even throwing a toothpick into a fire is considered a violation of the Sabbath under this category. You're not supposed to extinguish anything like that fire. You're not supposed to finish anything, that meaning completing any useful article or category, maybe in the form of repairs or adjustments. You're not supposed to smooth stone. You're not supposed to blow up balloons and things like that. You're not supposed to write. No writing, no notes, no printing, even rubber stamps are included in this. You're not supposed to erase anything. It just goes on and on. Cooking, washing, sewing, tearing, which is to take a garment apart or something like that, or even papers. You're not supposed to take apart papers that are glued together. Tying knots, untying knots, making shapes, which means to cut out pieces of like a dress or something like that. Plowing, planting, reaping, harvesting, threshing, which is what the disciples were guilty of, threshing and winnowing. Here's one that says selecting. You're not supposed to, if you have a handful of berries, you're not supposed to select out the bad ones and only eat the good ones. But I guess you could take the good ones and throw away the bad ones. I don't know. It's a lot of small details. No grinding, no kneading, no combing, like making fibers and combing wool or something. No spinning, no dyeing, no chain stitching, no wrapping, no weaving, no unraveling, no building, no demolishing, no trapping, no shearing, no slaughtering, no skinning, no tanning, no smoothing, no marking. It's extensive. these laws are extensive. The problem is that the Pharisees, especially in Jesus' day, had written the laws, and they knew the loopholes within the laws to get away with what they wanted to do. And Jesus is going to call them on it. Jesus calls the Pharisees all kinds of names. He calls them a brood of vipers. He calls them whitewashed tombs or whitewashed sepulchres that look pretty on the outside, but on the inside they're full of dead men's bones. In Matthew 23, he accuses them of making heavy burdens and putting them on the shoulders of the people that they themselves wouldn't lift a little finger to move. There is this interchange in this particular circumstance with Jesus and the Pharisees. And in this sort of circumstance, there's going to be an exchange, or usually there's an exchange. Somebody challenges, somebody redacts, somebody rebuts, somebody, and the challenge goes back and forth. It's sort of a rhetorical argument, like a lawyers in a courtroom before a jury. And so there would have been an audience, and Jesus is one and the Pharisees are the other, and that's the two groups, and they're battling it out. And so Jesus proposes this idea: is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Is it unlawful, or is it lawful? Is it lawful to do good? Is it lawful to kill or destroy? What is lawful on the Sabbath day? And he looks around and he tells the man with the shriveled hand, stand up here in front of the group. Now I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? And he looks around and then he says to the man, stretch out your hand. Now that would have been the end of it, because Jesus has won the argument. He has proven that it is necessary to heal on the Sabbath. He also knows, as I believe, that this is a trap and that this just would have been the end of it. But it's not. It's not the end of it, because the Pharisees get violently angry. And in another passage, it says that they met together with Herodians, which oddly enough is a different group of Pharisees that are sympathetic to the Roman government, and the purist Pharisees, as would have been here in the synagogue, they didn't like each other because the Romans were considered evil. And so if you're siding with the Romans, you're siding with the evil side. You should be on our side, and especially if you're some of us. But they were just at odds with each other. They had different theology in some cases. They had different beliefs in cases. But the passage goes on to say that these Pharisees met with the Herodians to plan how to get rid of Jesus, how to kill him. Jesus makes this argument. He poses this question, and what he does in this instance is he shows their fallacy. He shows that he is right, that the Sabbath is intended for good things. They have written these laws for their own good, and he proves his point. He wins the argument. This would have been the end of it. They didn't have a response. They couldn't counter his argument. They couldn't make a rebuttal. And Jesus looks around and he says to the man, stretch out your hand. So it's taking place in front of a group of witnesses, and the man is healed. What's interesting to me is he didn't ask the man if he wanted to be healed. He didn't ask the man anything. He didn't talk to the man about his faith. He didn't ask the man if he wanted to be healed. Jesus didn't ask him. He just used this man to prove the point that the Pharisees were trying to make against Jesus, and Jesus used it to prove his point. And that is the point. The point of this whole story is not the miracle that took place. The point of this story is the rising tension between Jesus and the Pharisees that would eventually lead him to the cross. They were breaking the Sabbath law. He was keeping the Sabbath law. They had sapped the joy and the meaning of everything spiritual that connected the people with the divine. And they made it religious. They made it legalistic. They filled it with their laws. They filled it with restrictions. And they knew the loopholes to get through because they were the ones who came up with the laws. They made the rules to support what they wanted to do. And that's the point, that Jesus reveals their hypocrisy. Jesus reveals their inconsistencies. He reveals their true intentions. He reveals their own personal interests, which revolve around their own personal gain. It revolves around their own priorities. They are selfish. They are lazy, and they just want their own things the way they want it. They weren't going to have it any other way. They are talking about killing a man, Jesus in this case. Jesus is about his Father's work. He is healing, even on the Sabbath. The point of the story is that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. The point of the law had become corrupt. The point is that the Pharisees were losing power. They were losing control. They were losing influence. They were losing followers. They were losing money. They were highly educated and being beaten by this man of the earth. The point is, Jesus was meddling in their business, and he needed to be stopped. He needed to be quieted. He needed to be eliminated. Jesus' point, despite all their outward looks, is that the Pharisees were breaking the Sabbath. That people are more important than animals. That connecting with God is more important than following some legalistic list of rules. That people represent responsibility and animals just represent wealth. God desires compassion more than sacrifice, it says in Hosea chapter 6 and verse 6. And Jesus was doing just that. He's healing, he's performing miracles, even in the synagogue and even on the Sabbath. The Pharisees are plotting evil. They're plotting the demise of this man. They're plotting to kill him. This is premeditated murder, if you think about it. Jesus challenged the status quo, and he challenged the traditions of men, and he challenged the rulers of the day. He challenged the authorities, and eventually this would lead to his death upon the cross. But the truth of the matter remains. God created the Sabbath for people. The Sabbath is intended for us to worship, to rest, to practice community, to be with our friends and family, those we love. Jesus restored this man to full health and capability while the Pharisees plotted evil. But the truth of the matter remains. The Sabbath was intended for us, and no list of rules that sucks the life out of the joy that can be found in living for God is really worth it. Jesus brings freedom from the legalism and from all of the religiosity that we apply to all of this, and it really ought to be the other way around. So give thanks to him for all that he did and is doing in our lives and in your life, and continue to give thanks to God, for we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we are made to enjoy the Sabbath with him and with each other. Thanks for watching.